Hey, Mike here, and I've got some really exciting news to share. So over the past while, I've been working on something totally new, and I'm finally ready to start talking about it. And it is that I have just launched a brand new plugin company called Carve Audio. Now, the goal behind Carve Audio is simple. It's to make plugins that sound incredible, inspire creativity, and make your workflow faster without overcomplicating things. And I'm kicking things off with our very first release, which is called the Smashburger compressor. I was really hungry when I came up with the name. Anyway, the Smashburger isn't your typical compressor. It's designed to give you punch, warmth, and glue all in one simple tool, combining transient shaping, tube tone, tape drive, and easy parallel control so that you can make your mixes sound finished faster. It's available now at carveaudio.com, and to celebrate the launch, we've got some very special limited time introductory pricing where you can get it for just $29. We also have a 14-day free trial too, so if you want to try it, you can do that as well. So if you're ready to add some extra punch to your tracks, make sure to check it out at carveaudio.com. Hey, welcome to the MasterYourMix podcast. My name is Mike Indovina, and thanks for hanging out with me today. Today, I'm chatting with Angel Marcloid, and if you're not familiar with her, she is a musician, a mixing engineer, mastering engineer, visual artist. She's based out of Chicago, and she's worked with artists such as King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, which is quite the mouthful of a name. Blind Equations, Sungazer, and so many more. And in today's conversation, we have a really great chat that tends to focus around this idea of the rules of audio and how sometimes there are rules that are meant to be followed and sometimes there are rules that are meant to be broken. And it's really about understanding the goal of a song to know when and where you should follow them versus breaking them. And Angel brings up a ton of great ways of analyzing your music to determine when something should be, loud versus quiet, or panned wide versus narrow, or how much chaos to add to something versus, reining it in. And Angel works on a lot of experimental music where, there's a ton of room for creativity. And a lot of artists actually really embrace that. But sometimes having the creative liberty to be able to be as creative as you want can actually work against you, right? So you do need to really understand how to get the song done the way it needs to be done and to get the artist's vision to truly come to life while not infusing too much of your own. So, there's just so many ways that working with experimental creative music can go sideways. So in this conversation, Angel and I get into, understanding your role as an engineer, how to be creative, and how to implement all that creativity, but still also serving the project at the end of the day. So if you're working on any sort of experimental music, if you're someone who considers yourself a really creative person who wants to be experimental with the sounds that you're getting in a mix or the processes that you use during the recording, mixing, or mastering stages, I think you're going to really enjoy this one. So that said, let's just jump right into it. Angel Marcloid, thank you so much for being on the MasterYourMix podcast. How's it going today?
It's going good. Happy to be here.
Awesome. For people who might not be familiar with you, can you give us a little bit of that background in terms of who you are, what you do, what kind of projects you're working on, and all that good stuff?
Yeah. Well, I've been playing music my whole life. I was raised in a music-loving family, not a musician family, but a music-loving family. So I wasn't raised around instruments, but I was raised around a lot of music. My parents were into rock mainly in the 80s. So I grew up with a lot of progressive rock, arena rock, Boston, Rat, Winger, Rush, blah, blah, blah. And so I picked up instruments, drums, guitar, whatever, and kind of started teaching myself. My parents noticed that I wasn't half bad as a 2-year-old. So they got, we didn't have a lot of money, but they did what they could to get me a toy set or whatever, or a cheap acoustic or something. And I think I just showed promise, and so it kind of went from there. My dad wanted to be a musician when he was younger, but ended up more in the audio field, and so I was raised with his audio-oriented mind. I'm learning about what different frequencies sound like, and what panning is and what compression is, as I'm 10, 15, 20 years old. And then actually doing this work professionally, mixing and mastering specifically, came about because I had just always been working minimum wage jobs and was convinced that the music I make wasn't going to make me a living because it was too weird. but then like I don't know, I just got the idea that like, oh hey, I could be doing this career. I'm actually really good at it. I've been getting good at it. I should do this for a job. And it started as a side job, but it picked up so quickly that like I told my job like, hey, I'm going to be doing this other work like 1 or 2 days a week, so I won't be able to come in as much. And then I went on a short tour for about a week and a half, and while I was on tour, I was like getting so many inquiries like on the internet because I'd been posting about the work I was going to start doing, that I came back from tour and I did not go back to my day job for one single day. Like none of them knew that it was going to happen. Like I didn't even like mean to quit. I was just like, I can't come back. And it's been like that ever since. I had kind of a dry spell for like a couple months, like earlier this year. But other than that, for the past like 5 to 6 years, it's been pretty steady work.
That's amazing. So I think in some ways that's an anomaly. Like I know a lot of people that takes a really long time to get started, right? So what do you think it was about your approach to, announcing, I'm going into this, I'm doing this? Like, what was it that you were doing at that time, do you think, that was able to generate so much interest and to get people paying attention to you?
Well, I have an advantage that a lot of people going into this field don't have. So I don't like to talk as if, hey, like anybody can do this. And I do mean that anybody can. But it's not one of those things where it's like, hey, I did it, just put your mind to it. It'll fall into place, because it is an anomaly, like you said. I think most of it has to do with the fact that I have been playing music in bands for my whole life. Like, I'm 41 now, even though my room looks like I'm 12 or 8. But like, my first public performance that wasn't like a school talent show was when I was 8, and I played drums. My parents like knew bar owners, so I was in a bar when I shouldn't have been. I played drums to the Black Crowes' Hard to Handle with a cover band that my dad knew. That was my first performance. And then I think like a couple months later or something like that, I went back and played with that same band and played a Spin Doctors song, Two Princes, I think, and I played it way too slow. So like, all that to say, I've been in music and playing music for a really long time. I've done a bunch of DIY tours. I've played drums, guitar, been a vocalist, a bass player in all kinds of bands. So it's like, even though I've jumped around different genres and styles throughout my life, I've just always been connected with a lot of musicians. And so to kind of answer your question, my whole background and the networking and the people I've known and spoken to and worked with in various ways, those were my clientele starting out. I already had a clientele. And so if you're just somebody who loves music and isn't a musician and you're like, I want to get into audio engineering, and you kind of go in that way, like blind, even if you're going to school for it, it's like the advantage that I had is not there. I've seen so many engineers struggle because they're coming from totally different places in their lives and going into audio when they like don't even have any friends who are in bands. I don't even know what to say to those people. Like, those people really do need Brian Hood for coaching, because he's really good at getting people from there to somewhere.
And for people who don't know who you're talking about, Brian Hood is a mutual friend of both of ours who has helped with a lot of studio business side of things. So, and he does a lot of coaching as well. So, Brian, shout out to you, dude. You're awesome.
Yes, 6-figure creative.
Yeah, but I think you bring up an interesting point, and it's, being a musician can be an advantage. And I think, to be honest, a lot of the people listening to this are musicians themselves. And
yeah, probably.
But it's not just enough to be a musician too. I think it's about, you play gigs and you actually have to make connections with the people that you're playing with. Like, I can think of so many gigs that I've played where like a lot of the other bandmates, like band members of the other bands, like they don't talk to us. Like they just kind of do their own thing and they're in their own world. And it's like, you're never going to network. You're never going to connect with other people if you're doing that. So like, making an effort to actually like introduce yourself and like put yourself out there. Like, maybe it's not the most comfortable thing to do if you're like an introverted person, but getting out there and actually like creating conversation and learning people and like who they are and I think when you create those relationships, that's going to make it easier for someone who's going to get into starting their own studio, because now you've at least established some sort of connection. You're not just like the creepy drummer in the corner. You know what I mean? So I think that that's like a really important thing for people to hear, to just get themselves out there and get started. And then it would make what you did make a lot more sense, because you've already created those relationships.
Yeah, exactly. And what's better about that scenario, I think, is that I'm not always going into it thinking like, oh, I need to network. I'm just kind of socializing or connecting with people. And so I think I worry about when people like are like, okay, gotta network, gotta go to this show, gonna introduce myself to the bands, and it's just kind of weird. Some random guy's like, hey, I'm so and so, and the band's just like, cool, thanks for coming. And they're like, well, I record bands. So like, I mean, that can work and that's fine, but it's
Yeah, people will see through that ulterior motive and get turned off by it.
yeah, that's one thing that I really, really, really hate about cold emails and especially reaching out to people that I already know to kind of like advertise a little bit. Yeah, people can sense that, and there's nothing wrong with hitting someone up because you want to work with them on a project, but people can sense that, and nobody likes to be pitched to, especially when it's someone you know, because it feels like like a one of those pyramid schemes. Like when you have like somebody from your high school you haven't talked to in 20 years reaching you out like, hey, I got a proposition for you. So I don't want it to be like that, and it can be like that, and I think that I have weirded out people that are close to me by like trying to like do the cold contact type thing. So yeah, networking is hard. I'm pretty socially awkward, mostly in person, and it's really difficult. I feel for anybody who has trouble with the networking aspect. But
yeah, but at least putting yourself out there, that's all you got to do, right? And just being a genuine hang. Because like ultimately at the end of the day, if someone's going to come in your studio and work with you, like they want to be hanging out with someone that's going to be fun to hang out with, and that's all it comes down to. It's not just like they don't want to think it's all business, you know. Maybe some people, I guess.
No, and it's not comfortable for me when it's all business. I become friends with everybody I work with to a degree, because I don't like it to feel dry and entirely business-like. And music is an emotional thing. Even the engineering process is emotional, and just knowing how your clients like feel about a certain part of the song you're working on can be really, really helpful and integral. So like, yeah, just business as usual is not how I like to work. I want to be able to like crack jokes. I want them to be able to make fun of me, and I want to be able to make fun of them.
For sure.
Yeah.
I love it. That's how it should be, right? It's just like you would do that with all your buddies anyway, right? So, yeah, that makes sense. Well, I'd love to dive into your mixing process a little bit. And you do a lot of work with different styles of music, a lot of genre blending stuff, a lot of experimental music. Let's just start from the beginning. Like when it comes to mixing a track, like what's your typical workflow normally look like there? Like how do you approach a new mix, or what are you listening for? That kind of thing.
Well, one of the things about working with an experimental approach to different genres versus working in a certain genre is that the nature of the material I get to work with is going to vary quite a lot from artist to artist, depending on what they're doing. You're working with experimental music, or at least stuff that's just a little more avant-garde, is just like off the path a little bit, even if it's just like really progressive rock or something like that. I'm getting all kinds of things. Like I'm working with like, you know, grindcore bands where they, instead of a guitar player, they have somebody who just does pedal feedback with their mixer, or I might be working with an ambient artist who just makes ambient loops out of like cassette loops that they've made, or it could be something like just like danceable rhythmic electronic music that you wouldn't necessarily approach differently than you'd approach like EDM or something, but it's still like weird enough to where like you need somebody who's not going to try and just put you in the cookie cutter EDM mold or whatever. So there's so much variety. Like if you work in metal or something, you kind of have like a very similar process with every project you do. Like there's been a couple of engineers that I've learned from who they have their niche, and their niche sounds like sonically similar from project to project, and they get really good at what they do. But for me, it's more like learning how to approach different genres. So the process varies quite a lot depending on the project. Like if I'm getting something where there's a drummer who has like a mic'd drum set, and there are also guitars, and there are vocals, many of which are lead vocals, then, I kind of approach it like in a traditional way that your average, rock or metal or even, country or indie rock engineer would do, get the drums balanced and, just probably going through it the way that you might learn like at school. But when I'm working on something and there's only like 6, multi-tracks per song, and every song they're different, the nature of the content of it is completely different. You kind of have to be really good at understanding that. You have to be good at not trying to like mix the drums of a project according to like the wrong genre, the wrong vibe or whatever. So it really requires, I think, experience in a lot of different genres, and it requires a lot of different listening to a lot of different types of music so that you know what to do when somebody comes to you with something really unique. I mean, I get recordings that are just like improv, like harsh noise, and it's just a brick. Every song is just a brick, and it's like dynamics isn't part of it. Like that's not even, it's supposed to be that way. So you can't get a recording like that and be like, oh no, this is way too loud. Like you've limited and compressed things too much. Like you're clipping your mixer. Like this is a problem. Like, I just get it, and I'm like, okay, like this is what your music is. This is what your art is. So yeah, I don't know if that really answers your question, but you do have to have a lot of experience in a lot of different areas. And I know that it's generally not suggested that you put all your eggs in one basket and do too many different things. But I think of it as kind of like one thing. And that one thing just has a lot of different ways that you could do it. I don't even think I would necessarily be like super good at mixing like a straight up like pop record. I probably could, but like I wouldn't be able to not like get kind of weird with certain things or whatever. So I think my specialty definitely is in, I like to say, experimental and progressive and forward thinking music, because I think all three of those terms kind of cover everything.
For sure. Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like it can be difficult enough to get good at mixing one genre alone and being able to like, get your quality to like whatever the modern standard is for that style of music. But when you're working with like a lot of this experimental genre blending stuff, like there isn't really a clear target to shoot for. It's not like you can use reference tracks to like figure out the the frequency balance or the level balance or whatever, right? It's definitely not very easy to do that, at least, or at least it seems like it would be to me. So I'm curious to know, like, when it comes to mixing and trying to figure out like that overall frequency balance of a mix and getting something that's going to translate really well, like, what are your approaches there in terms of just knowing kind of your ranges of what's passable for translation and what's not?
Well, I think that one thing is that, it's good to be able to get on the same page as your client about what they're going for. I think references are really helpful depending on the project. They can also be kind of a nuisance and a distraction sometimes. But it does help to have references and to get on the same page as your client. I think that like reference points in different genres are fine for this kind of thing, as just like guides. Like, because if I'm doing something really like beat heavy electronic, and the energy is pretty high throughout the track, like, I'm not going to approach that like I would like lounge jazz or anything. Like it's gonna be loud. It's gonna be like consistent. It's gonna be, -8, -7, -6 even at times maybe. So you just kind of have to like It's also really intuitive and emotional. Like sometimes I'll just listen to a client's project and know what I think should happen. And a lot of times the client, that's exactly what they're going for, and I've nailed it and I've understood completely without even having to talk to them about it. And then other times it involves more conversation, but you just kind of feel it out. I usually just kind of do what I think is best, like for the first pass, unless I have any really specific instructions from a client, and then I might explain like why I went in that direction to the client when I send it. I've never really found myself feeling lost as to what the tonal balance should be and everything. It's very intuitive. It doesn't mean I'm always right, but it just comes naturally. And part of that is probably just ADHD, like racing thoughts and lots of different things going on at once. It really caters to mixing, actually.
Well, it's interesting. Like, I feel like another thing that comes along with a lot of that experimental stuff is just like, from the experimental music that I've listened to a lot, it's like there could be a lot of density in these tracks sometimes, and between like lush reverbs or lots of sound effects or just like weird sounds in general, and like they might not always be like very traditional, rock or metal kind of instruments that you're working with or arrangements. So to me, like sometimes that. I guess it's like with that style of music, sometimes chaos is part of the pleasure of that music, right? But and you're not necessarily shooting for clarity all the time. But as far as like creating focus in a mix and giving people something to listen to, like what's your approach there as far as like finding those elements that need to be like in focus or that people need to like hear clearly, and how do you go about usually creating space and mixes for that kind of thing?
Yeah, you just have to kind of figure out what the most important elements are, like what's there for support and what's there to be focused on. And there are times where like my guess on what that is going to be different from what the client wanted. In cases where we don't discuss every single thing up front, I might put a certain element like in the center, like mostly mono, not very wet, because I thought that was like one of the things that's supposed to be carrying the tune. And then they were like, it's more of a background element. If you could bring this vocal forward instead. So that happens. But I mean, I have some traditional approaches to that. Like I really value in dense recordings, dense productions, like having your mono elements, or even like panned off, but like in a kind of an awkward way, or like in a space that the rest of the music isn't in. Like I'll sometimes like to put an element, like make it binaural and like put it like a little bit behind your head, like right up here. And it just kind of sounds like, all right, I'm listening to music, but what the hell is that thing going on over there? Like, what is that? Like, I mean, I love that. So I like to utilize different spaces at once. Like traditional, engineering. You're gonna want like a set of reverbs, reverb sends, for vocals, and you send different things to the same one. But sometimes in more experimental productions, I guess I might just have different reverbs in different types of room. I might have like a drum set in a stairwell along with a vocal that's in a car even. Like, I'm really trying to get kind of strange and uncanny with it a lot of times when the production calls for it. I mean, this isn't all the time. I mean, I work on plenty of stuff where I really shouldn't get, too weird. It just needs to be loud and punchy and clear. So yeah, it all depends. But yeah, when there's really wide stuff going on, I like to have those couple of like mono dry elements, so they're here in front of your face while everything else is like swirling around you. And other times it's not really about any particular element being audible. It's about the texture you're creating. It's like, if you look really closely at this blanket, like you can see all the different fibers, but I don't really give a shit how each little different fiber looks. I just, when you hold up the blanket, you just want to see all the colors. So it's like, there are mixes I've done where there's just like 50 things happening at once, and you might not really be able to to pick out a lot of them, but it's all supporting the texture. So sometimes, yeah, you don't really need clarity. You just need like a big wall of sound.
For sure. No, I love that analogy. That's a great way of looking at it. You'd mentioned the idea of like getting weird with mixes. And I would also imagine that with you being such a creative person and working with a lot of other creative musicians working on experimental music, there's probably a big window of opportunity for you to be really creative with your mixing process. And I'm curious to know, like, how do you straddle that line between like just getting the job done versus like being really creative and messing with someone's like tracks and, adding your own creative element to it?
Yeah, I do fuse my mixing work with production at times, depending on the client, depending on the project, depending on budget, time, inspiration, all kinds of things. A lot of times artists just kind of already have most of what they want like kind of already done. They just need it clarified and balanced and stuff like that. But other clients, it just feels like there's room for a little ear candy. And once in a while, I will just go for it and add it. And I'll tell the client, like, I just felt like this part, like the guitars needed to be heavier. So I dubbed in, like I doubled the guitars like an octave down or something. Or I doubled the vocal melody on the bridge with like a synth that I blended the melody in. So like, let me know if that's cool. I think it really helps the music. So I'll do stuff like that. I have some clients who I think just assume that I'm just going to play all over their album at this point. Like my friend Faye, who has a project Trust Fund Ozu. It just kind of became normal for every album of hers that I mix, which is, it's going, including EPs. I feel like we're going on like 5 or 6 now, where it's just like, I'm just going to keep picking up my guitar. Like whether it's an actual solo or whether it's doubling some synths or making a heavy part heavier, because I have like a 7 and an 8 string guitar. And I don't think she's ever told me like, take that out. If anything, it's just been like, turn it down a little bit so we can hear the vocals. But yeah, I'll just do it when it feels right. And if the client likes it, then that's great. Sometimes, my whole job is to be very production-y when I'm mixing. Ellipticism record I'm mixing right now is kind of like that. I'm playing instruments in every song almost to just like fill it out somehow, because her ideas are like a little bit more like skeletons. So it just varies. Depends on the client, depends on the project. Sometimes it's planned, sometimes it's not. Yeah, it can be all over the place. There's a big handful of albums out there that I've mixed where some of the guitar you're hearing or something is actually me, but just like uncredited or whatever.
That's cool. Yeah, I guess having those lines of communication with your clients is really important to know like what they're open to and what they're not, right?
Yeah, a lot of people just kind of like trust me. There are some people that kind of don't even fully know what is good and what isn't, and that's not to insult them, but there are just some artists who just kind of like, they have a lot of control over their music, but the production or the recording, they just like don't really know much about it and know that someone else does. So they're just kind of like, I just do the first pass in the mix and they're like, yep, that's it. Maybe I'd like to hear this a little bit more in this part, but they don't have anything to say about like the snare tone. They wouldn't even know how to like nitpick certain things because it's just not their realm. But then other people, very, very specific tastes. So.
For sure. It's interesting because like with creativity, I feel like there's kind of two schools of thought with it. Some people are like, there are rules and you follow those rules, and there's other people and some people will say that like having rules actually allows you to be more creative because you have your confines. And then there's other people who are like, there should never be rules to any of this stuff. Like it's kind of a free for all. Where do you stand on that? Like what's your take on that? And are there things rules that you would follow yourself versus things that you're just like you don't care for?
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of things in all of those different categories. There are some like the rules that I obey like pretty religiously versus the rules that I always break versus the ones that I break sometimes and not others. It it really just comes down to what the point of the rule is. There's a lot of things I will pretty much always do. Like I probably won't like master something to the point where, you know, nothing's hitting the ceiling like the whole time. Like I want it to be as loud as possible, but with the intended dynamic range. So even if it's like -16 the whole album, like it's still gonna hit the top somewhere, like as if I'm normalizing it or something. And so I don't see any reason to like not do that. Like that's a rule I like to follow. I like the rule of having my ceiling like a fraction of a dB below 0. There are rules like I will maintain the same like file specs like throughout the process. So if somebody sends me a 96, I'll just stay in that till the end, or if they send me 24, I'll stay in that. Stuff like that, I guess. But then there are things like, okay, I'm probably going to keep the kick in the center and pretty much everything, unless there's some weird shit going on. But like rules like, you know, keep your bass in mono, or, you know, put your lead vocals in the center and the background ones are panned out, you know, those kinds of things, which are really effective when they should be, but are not necessary. Like I swear every year that goes by, I am making the bass like wider and wider, I feel like, on productions. When it needs it, when there's time to shine. Like I'll put a stereo course on it and just make it like really slow to where it doesn't sound like watery. It's just like really wide. I think people are realizing that more and more, that your bass doesn't always have to be like straight up the center the whole time and everything. But like just as an example of something where, you know, people always say follow this rule, and I'm just like, but that doesn't sound good, at least not right here. I think that's actually a bad idea. So it's about the purpose of the rule. Like you want compatibility, I don't like the word competitiveness, but when we're talking about loudness, like it needs to be competitive to some degree. So yeah, there's certain rules that are important that make it so the consumer experience is like not problematic. But then you have other rules where like you don't have to follow any of them depending on what you're going for. If I'm working on a record that's like pop, it might be like really experimental pop or avant-garde pop, but like it's probably still going to be important that the vocals are a center and that the vocals are a little bit on top of everything, if that's what the artist wants, because it's still pop. But, you know, when I'm working with like really like dense and chaotic like noise rock, like the vocalist might want to be tucked in to the mix to where the guitars and the drums are just as loud as the vocals, and nobody's taking priority over each other. So that's probably something that like the average engineer probably wouldn't want to do, tuck all the vocals in like that to where you can't quite understand them. But like I would for that kind of music if that's what sounds good. So yeah, you really just got to know why the rule is there and what it's going to do for you.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a great way to put it. Yeah, there's certain things that I think are just like, they're not even rules, they're just like habits that I think people have formed. And because of the fact that you do it so often, you just kind of like, people default to it, thinking it's almost a rule. And so yeah, it's like, it's going to come down to knowing the style of music, knowing what the artist wants, and then you can play with a lot of that. And I do think that like, from the technical side of things, like you were talking about, you know, preserving sample rates and bit depths and all that stuff like that, like, yeah, that has a purpose. And so it makes sense that like those things are going to do consistently. But then with the mixing side of things, there are going to be those artistic elements, like pulling down a vocal or panning it off to the side or something like that, that are just like, that's a creative decision, and that impacts the experience for a listener. And if that's the right move, then do it, you know?
Yeah, exactly. One more example that I thought would be good for that, like when you have metal bands who have keyboards, like usually what happens is the priority is given to the guitar, and that the keyboards are kind of stereo, panned out, like kind of under everything. And like, I don't know, that's cool, but I mixed this black metal record once where the keyboards were actually the priority and the guitars took the back seat. And even if the keyboards were really wide and stereo, the guitar might be actually mono and just like a little bit lower in the mix. And so that's like not what the average engineer, rock engineer, metal engineer would probably think to do. But that's the way we did it. So yeah, just one more example of like, knowing what rules to break and why, because we wanted it to be keyboard centric. Metal where the keyboard is forward, that's not super common. That's really exciting to me. So yeah.
Totally. I can absolutely relate to that. There's this like gothic metal band that I do a lot of work with as well. And I feel like every song we're talking about, which is the priority? Is it the guitars or the keys? Because sometimes they want that like just kind of pad in the background, and other times they want it to be the main thing. And so yeah, every artist is going to have their own vision for what they want. And so it's having those lines of communication to understand what it is that they want. Then you can play with that within your mix. But otherwise, yeah, I mean, for me, like I would have probably defaulted to the guitars being the bigger thing because it's a metal band. I think of guitars when I think of metal, right? But yeah, so yeah, knowing where it needs to go and leaning into that is all you need to do there. Is there anything that you like to do with your mixes that like some people would look at it and be like, wow, that's crazy. Like, what? You actually do that? Like, is there like anything in particular that stands out as like a crazy experiment you like to do a lot?
Well, I guess it's not that crazy, but like when I'm doing mixing and I'm doing the ear candy stuff, and there are different sections of songs that are supposed to stand out or sound different from other ones. I really like to mess a lot with space, like 3D space. And so I mess with a lot of convolution, reverbs. I really like small rooms. And I like room sounds where you can have a sense of the space, like how small it is, what shape it is or whatever. And so I really like to throw certain parts of a song, like for an effect, like into like some weird room for a second, or I'll put like all the guitar in this one spot or all the vocals in this one verse, like in some like weird basement or a living room or a bathroom stall or whatever, using all these different convolution reverbs I have. And I guess that it's a little rebellious because like I was saying earlier, like there's more of there's kind of a traditional like way of using reverbs in a production where different things like share the same ones, and it's like it kind of like makes physical sense. And yeah, I kind of get crazy with those convolutions sometimes, and I'll send back a mix and be like, yeah, all your keys in that 1 second I put in a small closet. And it's always like a cool like little ear candy thing, and clients like to know those kind of things about like what I snuck into their production, like the lore behind it or whatever. But I'm trying to think of more unconventional things, and it's hard because I think when it comes to mixing, it's really easy to kind of experiment. With mastering, it's a bit different. It's maybe harder to experiment in safe ways. So I think if anything, mastering is a lot of times where the stuff takes place where like maybe I wouldn't want other engineers to know I was doing it because I would be afraid of being judged. But like, I don't know, just like little things like putting something like, I don't know, putting like an auto EQ like after your limiter and then putting another limiter after that just to seal it up, because it sounds good fully mastered except for a certain range pokes out a little bit too much, and people will be like, "Well, go back to the mix," or "Go, don't do like surgery," or like don't just like keep piling on plugins to fix issues when you should go back to the start. And it's like, it's another one of those rules that are really good. And at the same time, like if I do some dumb thing with plugins and mastering that you're not supposed to do and it sounds fine, then like really who cares? Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's just all sorts of things that you could do wrong, like just straight up like distorting the shit out of your master bus. I mean, there is very well produced, like highly professional engineers like making extreme metal records these days, and it's to the point where like like actually like throwing a sub drop into your song that's so loud to the point where it ducks the entire mix, like a large, like it's not even subtle. It's like, wow, something's wrong. Like there's this death metal band called Extermination Dismemberment, and they have some sub drops in their songs, and it sounds like your shit is literally breaking when those sub drops hit. But they want it to, like, that's the thing. They want to create that feeling of, oh no, like there's way too much, like my whole system is distorting because there's too much bass. So like, you know, that used to be something that all engineers would just always avoid. Like that's a terrible thing. But it's like, just sit back, zoom out and listen to it. Listen to what it's doing. Listen to like how it makes you feel, like what the purpose of it must be, and then it all becomes like perfectly fine. Like, hey, why not?
For sure. Yeah. It's interesting. Like one of my early mentors back in the day, like one of the first things he said to me was like rules can actually ruin great mixers. Like if you understand like the rules of what you're supposed to do, like sometimes you just, you fall on those as such a default that like it ruins your vision of like, does it sound good? And, you know, when you focus on that, who cares how you get there? And I remember like watching him mix and I'd be like, why are you using like 5 plugins to do the same thing? And maybe he didn't understand how to use those plugins as efficiently as he could. But like he was just focused on the sound so much that it didn't matter what that chain looked like. It got the sound that he wanted. And I think that's a really important lesson for people is like, sometimes you just have to like, you know, sure, there's a beauty in simplicity, and simplicity can actually be really powerful and help you focus differently. But simplicity works if you're only focusing on the sound of the music and you know, like what sounds good.
Simplicity for simplicity's sake drives me nuts. It's really about like minimalism is a cool aesthetic, and it's comfortable, it's not complicated and everything, but like, yeah, when people are just like, whoa, you have 7 plugins on that vocal. It's like, that's so arbitrary to me. That's like saying you're wearing like 7 shirts. Like, okay, yeah, I understand how like that might seem weird, but what if I like layering? And what if one keeps me sealed from the cold, and then the one in the next one is like more of an aesthetic thing, and then I have a vest on over it, and blah blah blah. You know, like, oh, what a stupid example, but it's just like you. My point is that you can't just like look at the amount of plugins or look at how much the needle on the compressor is moving, and like judge that. Like, there's so many like YouTube engineers out there, and I don't say that derogatorily because I've learned a lot from them. That would be like, you know, when you got 7, 8, 9 plugins on your master chain, like, you know that, you know, you need to start over. You need to go back to the beginning. And it's just like, what the hell are you even talking about? Like, what plugins are they? Where are they set to? Like, why are they like that? What are they doing to the material? Like, you know, like you can't judge it based on those kind of like surface level things. I can't tell you like, I'm working on this master right now and the last song hits -4. Like, you might tell an engineer that and they might be like, oh God, like, you know, that's probably a disaster or whatever. But like, you don't know what kind of music it is. You don't know what it's, you know, what it's for, like why that happens, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, a lot of rules are these kind of generalizations that we make from a distance, like, oh, too many plugins, or, oh, your mics are faced the wrong way, or like, you know, that plugin has a ton of aliasing that you can't do anything about. Like, you just need to get closer and see like why these things are being done, and not judge based on some like hard fast rule, like don't compress your snare that much. That's like a bad amount. That's too much. Be aggressive. Don't be afraid to be aggressive with your mixing. And that's something I've learned from people is, yeah, a lot of times mixes are not aggressive enough, and that's why they don't sound good. They sound weak and dull.
Oh, absolutely. That's a great point there. It's funny because it's like, I've been doing this for so long. I know a lot about what I'm doing and how to use all the tools. But it's like, when I listen to a record, I'm not like I'm not like, oh, they definitely use this fab filter EQ going into like the 1176. Like I'm not dissecting plugin chains by listening to a mix. I'm just enjoying the song. So like, yeah, there is something to be said for just like, if it sounds good, it is good, whatever the chain looks like. And yeah, I mean, as an engineer, if you can do that in a really efficient way and minimal setup, then great, and do it. But don't also don't be so focused on the minimalism to the point where it disrupts your vision for achieving the sound that you want. So
yeah, some
yeah.
people think minimalism means it's good, and if you're maximal in any way, then you've convoluted it, or you've messed it up, or you've scrambled it, or you've overprocessed it. And yeah, that's just none of that is true all the time. It's all context based, and that's one of the cool things about doing what I do, is that sometimes, like, if you aren't minimal, you are actually overdoing it, but for that project, not in general.
For sure. Well, you kind of hinted at this a little bit earlier, but one of the things that really like stands out to me when I listen to your mixes is the way that you handle a lot of ambience, and in particularly like the width that you get in your mixes is something that I found myself like gravitating towards. Like I think you do a great job of that, and just having things that are moving around in a way that keeps my ears entertained. Like it feels immersive, and I really like that about your mixes. And so I'm curious to know a little bit more about like that process as far as creating that width. It sounds like it's probably in relation to what you were talking about earlier with some of the reverbs and the way that you stack different sounds. But is there anything else that you like to do there as far as getting width?
Well, I think that width is a place where, like, when an aspiring engineer discovers that width is an issue with their mixes, and one of the reasons why they sound dull or thin or whatever, usually what happens is they go make an absolute mess of their mixes, because they're like, oh God, when I throw this stereo widener on this thing, it's like the clouds part, and the sound that I was listening to like gets immersive in it. There's an emotional experience that you have with it. And I think that can be a little distracting, because you start to get really excited about the way things sound when you make them wider, and you start to lose sight of, like, the big picture. And so I think it's really important to, when you start going crazy figuring out how to bring more width into your mixes, you have to listen really carefully and be careful. Like, use meters, use headphones, use your monitors. Don't just do general listens, like listens for particular things. And so it's hard to do, but I think one thing is being good at knowing what different like width processes do. Like, you can take the stereo information that's already there and make it louder, or you can use some kind of like sample delay, and sometimes the sample delay can be like modulated. You have Isotopes Imager that lets you adjust the width of 4 different custom bands, but you can also use different types of like doubling. Like, I'm not exactly sure what exactly those stereo buttons do in Isotopes Imager, but it's some kind of like sample delay modulation type thing. And so there's just so many ways to do it. And so you have to just kind of like know what will work best for every situation. Like, let's say you have distorted guitars and you only have one of them and you want to make them stereo. If you use like Waves Doubler plugin, like you're gonna make it wider, but it's gonna be a little chorusy and stuff like that. And especially if you're putting that kind of modulation after all of the harmonic enrichment of a distortion, it's gonna be like really obvious sounding and washy. And that's a really cool sound, and I use it myself because I love 80s guitar rock. But in other situations, that would sound terrible. And the best thing to do if you can't double track is to just use a big sample delay with like no modulation, no nothing, just like the left and right are delayed, 100, 200, 300 milliseconds or something. And that's a way that you can do it where you're not going to make things too washy or blurry or whatever, if that's something that you don't want. Like, let's say you want your mix to be like really clear and crisp, but you only have one distorted guitar. Like, doing a sample delay and panning them out like that is going to get the guitar completely out of the way of the center, while also not doing anything to sort of like obscure it. Like you're not, there's no like, chorusy sounds on it or anything. So just knowing what method to use to get width for whatever exact purpose you're trying to get it for is like really important. Like you probably wouldn't throw that waves doubler on your master bus if you wanted your master to be wider. You would probably be real surgical and careful, and you might not even mess with anything that adds delay or modulation. You might just go for the volume of the sides. It really depends. So yeah, you just need to get good at it. But whenever someone's like, I'm trying to make my mixes more wide, like what plugin do I get? I'm always just like, that's the wrong question. You got to figure out the different ways of getting width, what it does to different things, and then know which method to use when and how much. Because, you get excited. You start blowing things out of phase, and going a little bit out of phase is fine, depending on how long it is, like what you're doing, the type of music you're making, like, all kinds of different factors. But yeah, people really, really mess up their mixes with width chasing. So it's got to be done really carefully. And thankfully, there's a lot of tools out there, and a lot of them are free or really cheap. So or come with your DAW. So you don't have to get Isotopes Imager, multiband Imager. There's all kinds of things you can use.
For sure. No, I love that. I think that's a great explanation of it, because yeah, it is one of those things where I see that all the time. People discover stereo wideners, and then it's like they add it to everything, and then all of a sudden you get these like crazy phase cancellations going on. And
yeah, they don't even know what it's doing. They don't know if it's modulating, if it's like changing as time goes, if it's adding a delay. Before I started mastering, I had someone master one of my mixes, and I noticed all of my kicks had this tiny little slap back on them. And I was like, what's that? And he told me he put, what is it? It's the same people who make OTT. It's called Dimension Expander. It's a free plugin. There's like a little bit of like a combination of like reverb, delay, and modulation. And the more you turn it up, like the bigger the gap between the dry signal and like the reflections hit. And he was like putting a little bit of that on the whole mix. And I was just like, that's a really bad way to like bring width into a master. Like you're literally adding reverb, delay, and like chorus almost to my whole master. But all he thought he was doing is, well, I should bring a little bit of width into the master, just make it a little wider. And that was probably a good idea, but like, yeah, that's not a good way to do it, at least for what I was going for.
Yeah, there'd be much better ways of going about getting that width in the mix without having to slap on a plugin at the end of it and saying it's wider.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think sometimes too, like people are just in a rush to get their idea done, that they just like, they have no regard for what they're actually applying to their mix. So
yeah, they're following the rule. They're following the guideline that says like this should be wide, and so they do the thing that they think will solve that problem, but they don't really know what they're hearing. And yeah, none of this is an insult or anything. Like nobody has to like be that type of listener, but that's why we have professionals that we work with, because then we don't really have to know everything. We can pay them to know.
For sure. Well, going back to my earlier question about like dense mixes, with dense mixes, like often one of the ways to get more separation and stuff is by panning and trying to achieve width and, giving elements its own space their own space within the mix. So how do you go about determining, which elements should have the most width in a mix? Is that just kind of going back to our earlier chat about like knowing the artist's vision for it, or is there more to that there?
Yeah, but sometimes the artist doesn't necessarily have a vision specific to that. So, it's a little bit of, you factor in trends and traditions and then your own tastes. I've noticed like vocalists who use a lot of auto-tune in like an expressive artistic way, not just like tuning, but like they actually want you to hear like the robotic you know, sound, the Cher, the TI thing. And what I'll notice is a lot of those vocalists will like widen, double like their vocals like so much because those plugins, the auto-tune plugin and the other ones like it, make that a big part of the auto-tune experience, like doubling in width too. So one of the people I mix for, she often sends her auto-tuned vocals like really wide and doubled because, it sounds good in the production process. It's exciting. It sounds big. And then usually when I go to mix it, I usually narrow it like quite a bit for most of the leads. And she's never said anything because it sounds good in the end. And because I'm bringing width back just in a different way. I'm using a little like a stereo delay or a little reverb, or I'm just collapsing the width like halfway or something like that. And she doesn't say anything because, and it's not a secret, she may know or may not know exactly what I'm doing with the vocals, but it's like, I need to do that in her music to get the density right. Because if I left her vocals like really wide like that, I mean, she's got tons of synths, heavy guitars, like crazy drumming, both electronic and real drums. The bass playing on the album is a lot of times distorted. There's, sometimes like, she's feeling crazy up to like 20 vocal tracks, like doing different things at different times. So it's like, if I don't basically say like, hey, can you just take all the width off your vocals and send them back? Or if I don't just collapse them myself or something like that, it just gets lost. And maybe you don't have the cool sound of the super wide auto-tune vocals in all of these parts of the songs, but like, you don't need that or even want that when it's like all these guitars and synths and crap are like going on. There's no sonic space to appreciate how immersive the vocals sound during those parts. So, it's intuition, it's a traditional knowledge, it's what the artist wants, it all factored into one. And they're like in verses when there's not like tons going on sonically, I might let the vocals just be as wide as she sent them, with even more effects on them even. So yeah, just I feel like songs are like journeys, they're stories to me. Every chord is like a different chapter almost. Like they each tell a different story to me. It's a journey. It's like watching a movie or something, or being in a movie. So these ideas just kind of jump out at me sometimes, like, oh, I think the bass needs to be straight up the center throughout this chorus, and in the next song it's like the bass needs to be the widest melodic instrument in this song. So yeah, there's not really a formula as much as I wish there was. It's just a lot of feeling things out, which is not totally helpful for aspiring engineers when they're asking you for advice on how to do things. I'm just like, oh no, you'll figure it out. Just feel it, man.
But what's interesting is like, I feel like there's kind of this like thread in a lot of what you've been saying, which is that, people tend to focus on a lot of like the individual elements and how do I make the vocal sound wider, or like the guitars, like they'll focus on like one instrument and manipulate the shit out of that instrument to make that sound cool in isolation, and they're not really factoring in how it comes together as a whole. And it sounds like so many of the decisions and a lot of the answers that you've given here, they're always just coming back to that idea of like, well, what's it sound like in context? Because who cares about what you can do with it? It's like, how does this all fit together, and how does it, what's going to make it sound best as a cohesive unit, not just like a stereo vocal, and I think that that's something a lot of people get into, like a trap that a lot of people get into, which is like, yeah, just focusing on how do I make this instrument sound really good, or they'll like download cheat sheets or whatever, and it's like, that's how I EQ a kick drum, and they don't factor in that like, well, no, you have like really dense guitars that the kick drum has to poke through, or the bass is sitting in the same frequency range, like, so you really have to focus on the context of it all so that it comes together the right way.
I think that people can go so strong in the other directions to where they say things like never, like don't even use solo. And I think that is completely insane, because I'm a musician too. And so, I've spent many, many hours in my basement with my guitar and my pedals and my amp, EQing, and then walking away and listening and going back up and EQing and just trying to make it sound perfect, knowing that when I go to the gig next weekend, I'll be in a different room and everything I did will just sound bad. But so I do think it's very important, at least to me, to do a good amount of work in mono, or not in mono, in solo to get your signature tone that you want dialed in, the one that you would dial in at home and bring to the studio, bring to band practice and be like, this is my sound. Let's make it work in this context. So yeah, I'll do a bunch of drum mixing, a bunch of vocal mixing, a bunch of guitar mixing and stuff in solo. But then when I bring everything together, I'm going to have to go back and change everything, but it's fine. It's not backtracking to me. It's just coming into the mix with things the way you like them and then making them all work together. So yeah, I'm going to get the sickest guitar tone I can come up with in solo. And then when I bring it in with the band, like, I'll realize, well, yeah, all of that high end that I liked in solo, it's not going to work here because of the cymbals. So, I'll throw in an EQ on after that. So I have my corrective EQ separate from my preferred tone EQ or whatever. So yeah, I just kind of, I do both. I balance solo and listening to everything in context. I think it can get out of hand in either direction for some people. And I think that my best way of doing things is to make both of those approaches work together, depending on what they're being used for. Like, I cannot imagine only working on my guitar tone while listening to the rest of the mix. It's like, it's terrible. It's like you can't, no matter what, if you have other stuff going on, you can't hear a single element like totally clearly. You can't hear it like in a vacuum when there's the band's playing. So like, I would never be able to feel comfortable with my snare tone or my guitar tone or my vocal mix if I didn't do a good amount of getting it solid by itself first.
For sure. And I would argue that like the solution to that is really in creating like a hierarchy in the mix of what are the elements that are of the most importance, right? And if it's the guitar, then yeah, you can mix the guitar in solo and get it dialed in really, really well. And then when you snap out of it and listen to the full mix, like you're going to shape other things to fit that guitar and that tone, as opposed to if you just completely solo every instrument and make it sound great on its own without any factor of what actually needs priority in the mix, then that's where you're going to find yourself having to undo a lot of work, because at some point you do need to decide what is going to be that main element, and then you're going to have to kind of rejig everything to that main element. So it's like almost kind of starting with the main sound and then fitting things around that. Because yeah, things in solo aren't going to sound the way that they do in the mix. Like I always think about like when I listen to my bass tracks, when I listen to bass in solo, my basses are always super distorted. And so many people would be like, "Ooh, like that's nasty." But like in the context of a mix, it sounds great. So who cares? And it's just like, I don't always start with my bass as the main source, but I find that like when I need it to fit with everything else, having a lot of distortion ends up being the solution. So, but again, that's factoring in how it fits with everything else in the mix. So yeah, I think there is definitely a time and place for both of them, but it is about understanding that hierarchy in your mix so that you're making the right series of decisions, whether it's in solo or isolation. Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes the hierarchy is a little more obvious, but then when you're working with, more experimental or off-kilter types of music, you can get more creative with that. I also think it's cool sometimes to try to mix things in a way where nothing stands out or is tucked in, and it's all just kind of all out in front of you and a bit overwhelming. Like there's not something to easily latch onto. Like you have no choice but to take it all in, like sensory overload. So yeah, just another one of those areas of mixing where doing it wrong is sometimes, part of the sound.
For sure. So one of the last questions I always like to ask everyone is, at the end of the day, like when it comes to defining what makes a great mix, like how would you describe that?
Oh, wow. What makes a great mix? I think that it should be emotionally impactful. But when I think about emotional impact, I'm thinking of a lot of mixes that aren't good in a traditional sense. So I don't. Yeah, it's a hard thing to answer. I mean, I think that there are a lot of things that people can maybe like universally agree on, like a mix doesn't sound good if one thing is so much louder than other things that it's distracting. You know, nobody likes a mix that is really painful to listen to after like 3 songs, like if your high mids or your treble are too active or too harsh. And, no people don't want the drum transients either to like be so crazy that you kinda just feel like you're getting slapped in the face constantly while you're trying to listen to something. So there's like, if those things are out of balance, it can sound like a bad mix. It can be the sign of not a good mix. But aside from those standard things, I guess, if you have the basics in place, it just needs to feel emotional and impactful. It's usually a sign that a mix is pretty good. And I guess somebody who doesn't like know much about audio or like how to describe why it sounds good, it might just feel good even if they can't put their finger on it. And that's one way you have a good mix where, somebody who can't really say why still feels like really, impacted by it. And even though I listen to a lot of kinds of music that you could consider have like big uncomfortable elements like extreme metal and noise and even like minimalist like ambient music can feel uncomfortable because it's so repetitive and everything. So there's certain kinds of discomfort that are fine, that are part of the music. But if there's discomfort where it's just like the low end like keeps bothering you, the high end keeps bothering you just throughout the whole album, you just wish the vocals were a little bit louder. They're not cutting. That can all be signs of not a good mix. So when things just feel like they're where they need to be effective, the sounds that are supposed to tickle your ear do. The sounds that are supposed to really hit you do. The big dynamic shifts make you feel something. The big swells and then they cut off the silence, like they should confuse you, like fake you out, make you go, "Oh, I thought something was gonna happen and it didn't." If all that stuff is happening, like that's a pretty good sign that you have a good mix, I think.
I love it. I think that's a great spot to wrap up. First off, thank you for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it. And it's been great to learn more about your process. If people want to learn more about you, maybe even work with you, like what's the best way for them to do that?
The best and easiest way is probably my website, which is angelhairaudio.com. But I'm also on social platforms. I'm more active on social platforms under my music moniker, which is Fire-Toolz, Fire-Toolz, because I'm a child. So I'm more active on social media with that, and I talk a lot about audio stuff under those usernames. But I do still have social media presence for the business itself. But yeah, the my website, angelhairaudio.com, is the best. There's a contact form. You can book a call. And yeah, I'm pretty much open for biz. Like I have a lot of projects. I'm booked out in mixes for like a couple months at this point. But like, the sooner people hit me up, the sooner they can get their way in. And yeah, I look forward to hearing from any of your listeners. If any of you do hit me up, make sure you tell me where you came from so I can, thank Mike.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I really appreciate it. And like I said, this has been really great to learn more about your process. So thank you again for doing this.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was really fun.
So that was my chat with Angel Marcloid, and I thought it was really great to get into the weeds of, understanding the rules of audio versus balancing it with the creative side of it and when to break those rules. And I thought Angel did a great job of breaking down that way of thinking about serving your tracks while still having freedom for creativity. But I just love how she was focused a lot on the idea of like, what does a song need? And what's the purpose of the move that you're making? Are you doing it because it's something you think you need to do, or is it something that is actually to the benefit of the song? And I think that that's something that we all fall into as engineers, is this trap of like comfort. We do the same things over and over again. And so because of that, it just becomes this like second nature thing that sometimes works against us sonically. Sometimes there is a better way of doing the thing we want or getting the sound that we want. And I think it's a trap that like we start to think of these things as rules. So we just do them instinctively all the time. And I just really liked how in this conversation we were able to break down that idea of like, what is the purpose and how does this actually make the difference in the song? Is it serving the song? Is it the right move? Is it the wrong move? If doing something out of the ordinary sounds good, then it is good, And I think that that is really the main lesson to take away from this, is that idea of just like not being afraid to go crazy with a signal chain, not being afraid to pan things in a weird spot or add distortion or, mess around with different convolution reverbs or whatever it is. Ultimately, at the end of the day, if you have a vision in your mind for where that mix needs to go, execute it however it needs to be done. And I just think that's a really important thing. As long as at the end of the day, you're getting that vision to come to life, that's really important. So just really grateful for Angel being on here today and sharing all of that. And just lots of good things to take away from that and to be able to implement into your own mixes. Now, speaking of having your vision for your songs and knowing what to do to get that vision to come to life, that is exactly what I help my students with inside of my coaching program, Amplitude. And in that program, one of the very first things that we do is we establish what is it that you want your music to sound like. What sonics do you appreciate? What kind of effects do you appreciate? We really break down the individual elements of a track so you know where you want your track to go. And then based on that, I'll walk you through the recording, editing, and mixing process, hopping on calls with you, working on your mixes together, giving you feedback as you're recording your stuff, as you're editing it, as you're mixing it, working with you to make sure that that vision comes to life and giving you a very clear, repeatable, step-by-step process to follow so that at the end of the day, your vision comes to life. And if that's something that sounds of interest to you, make sure to check out MasterYourMix.com/amplitude. And you can find all of the details of my program there. And I'm offering free calls right now where I'd love to learn more about what you're working on, where you're feeling stuck, and to be able to offer some insight into where you need to put your energy. And if it seems like something that I can help you with, then we can talk about the program. But if you're interested in getting some help with your mixes and learning maybe where the gaps are in your process or what areas you can focus on to see quick improvements with your skills, again, make sure to visit MasterYourMix.com/amplitude. Book a call with me. I'd love to chat and learn more about your music and to see how I can help. And so, make sure to do that. And then with that said, we're at the end of this episode. Thank you so much for sticking around, and I can't wait to chat with you in the next one. We'll talk soon. Have a good one. Take care. Thanks for listening to the Master Your Mix podcast. Please make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app and leave a review. If you have any questions or comments for the podcast, send an email to questions@masteryourmix.com. And for more information on how to create pro recordings from your home studio, visit MasterYourMix.com.